After 18 months of house hunting, I finally found it, the perfect lakefront property. I pulled into the gravel driveway and felt my heart skip a beat. Crystal clear water stretched out before me like a mirror, reflecting the pine trees that lined the opposite shore. A private dock extended into the lake, weathered but sturdy. This was everything I had dreamed of. My real estate agent, Sarah, walked beside me toward the water. She had shown me dozens of properties, but nothing like this. The morning sun danced across the lake's surface, creating diamonds of light that seemed to welcome me home. "The lake access is the real selling point here," Sarah said, pointing to the dock. "Full, unrestricted access. It's written right into the deed." She pulled out the property documents and showed me the survey map. "See this blue line? That represents your water rights. They go back over 50 years." I could already picture my future here. Morning coffee on the dock, watching the mist rise from the water. Weekend fishing trips with friends. Peaceful evenings watching sunsets paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. After years of apartment living and crowded city life, this felt like paradise. The house itself was modest but well maintained. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a kitchen that opened onto a deck overlooking the lake. Previous owners had clearly loved this place. Wind chimes hung from the porch and flower boxes lined the windows. Everything felt peaceful and welcoming. "I want to make an offer," I told Sarah before we even finished the tour. The purchase process went smoothly. No bidding wars, no last-minute complications. Within 6 weeks, I held the keys to my dream property. Moving day felt like Christmas morning. I carried my coffee maker to the kitchen first, then immediately brewed a cup and walked out to the dock. The water lapped gently against the wooden posts. A blue heron stood motionless in the shallows, hunting for fish. I took a deep breath and felt tension leave my shoulders that I had not even realized I was carrying. This was home. My first few weeks were perfect. I spent hours maintaining the dock, replacing loose boards and treating the wood. The physical work felt therapeutic after years behind a desk. Neighbors would wave from their own properties as they walked their dogs or worked in their gardens. Everyone seemed friendly enough. "Beautiful spot you have there," called an older man from the property next door. His name was Jim, and he had lived here for 12 years. "Thank you, I feel incredibly lucky," I replied. "Just wait until you see the fall colors reflected in the water. It takes your breath away." Other neighbors stopped by to introduce themselves. Most had been here for years and spoke lovingly about the community. A few mentioned the HOA in passing, but I assumed it was just basic community maintenance. Maybe they organized the annual block party or maintained the common areas. I should have asked more questions. I should have researched what this HOA actually did. But I was too busy falling in love with my new life. Every morning, I walked out to the dock with my coffee. Every evening, I sat there watching the sun disappear behind the trees. The lake was everything I had hoped for and more. Clear enough to see fish swimming below the surface. Quiet enough to hear birds calling across the water. Perfect for the peaceful life I had always wanted. I had no idea that paradise was about to become a prison. The thick envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after I had settled in. No return address, just my name typed on a white label. Inside, I found a massive packet of documents, rules and regulations, fee schedules, violation notices. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of restrictions I had never heard about. Paint colors had to be approved from a specific palette. Landscaping required permits. Dock maintenance needed HOA oversight. Guest parking was limited to 2 hours without written permission. The monthly HOA fees were listed at $350. That was nearly double what I had been told during the sale. Additional special assessments could be levied at any time for community improvements. My throat tightened as I calculated the annual cost. Before I could process it all, my doorbell rang. A woman in her 50s stood on my porch, clipboard in hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, and she wore a navy blazer despite the warm weather. "You must be our new neighbor. I am Margaret, the HOA president." Her voice carried the tone of someone used to being obeyed. "I wanted to personally welcome you and discuss a few violations that have come to my attention." "Violations? I just moved in 3 weeks ago." "Yes, well, ignorance of the rules is not an excuse." She flipped through papers on her clipboard. "Your dock has several boards that do not match the community standard stain color. Your mailbox post needs to be repainted. And I noticed you had more than 2 guests parked here last weekend during your housewarming." My face grew hot. Those were friends helping me move furniture, and the dock was like this when I bought the house. "Previous violations do not excuse current noncompliance." Margaret made notes on her clipboard. "You will receive formal notices within 48 hours. Each violation carries a $50 fine if not corrected within 10 days. She handed me a business card and walked back to her car without another word. I stood in my doorway, holding the HOA packet and watching her drive away. The peaceful lake behind me suddenly felt less welcoming. That evening, I attended my first HOA board meeting. The community center was a cramped, windowless room with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table. Margaret sat in the center with 4 other board members flanking her sides. About 20 residents attended, but most kept their heads down and said nothing. Margaret ran the meeting like a courtroom, reading violations and issuing fines with cold efficiency. One couple was fined for having their garbage cans visible from the street 30 minutes past pickup time. An elderly man received a violation for planting roses without submitting landscaping plans. "Does anyone have questions or concerns?" Margaret asked at the end. The room stayed silent. I wanted to ask about the lake access rules I had found buried in the packet, but something about the atmosphere made me hesitate. This did not feel like a community meeting. It felt like a trial where everyone was guilty. After the meeting, several residents approached me in the parking lot. They spoke in whispers, glancing around to make sure Margaret was gone. "Do not make waves," warned an older woman named Helen. "I fought them over a fence issue 5 years ago. They made my life hell for months. Fines, liens, threats of foreclosure. It is not worth it." "Margaret has been president for 8 years," added Jim from next door. "She runs this place like her personal kingdom. The other board members are all her friends. They rubber stamp whatever she wants." "But what about property rights? What about the deed restrictions?" Helen shook her head sadly. "They have lawyers. Do you have $30,000 to fight them in court? Because that is what it will cost you, and you might still lose." As I drove home that night, the beautiful lake looked different somehow. The same moonlight reflected on the water, but now it felt like I was looking at it through prison bars. I had bought a piece of paradise, but somehow I had also bought myself a warden. The ambush came at the October board meeting. I had been living in my lakefront home for 3 months, enjoying every sunrise and sunset from my dock, when Margaret dropped the bomb that would change everything. "The board has voted to restructure lake access for safety and insurance reasons," she announced to the packed community center. Her voice carried that same cold authority I had come to dread. "Effective immediately, All water activities will require permits and scheduling through the HOA office. My stomach dropped. Around me, other residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. I raised my hand, my heart pounding. Excuse me, but my property deed specifically guarantees lake access rights. I bought this house because of that access. Margaret's smile was razor sharp. All property rights are subject to community safety standards and HOA oversight. Surely you understand the liability issues involved. That night I spread my property documents across my kitchen table. The deed was crystal clear. I owned full, unrestricted access to the lake. The language was specific and unambiguous. This had been part of my property rights for over 50 years. But the next morning brought a new set of rules posted on the community bulletin board. Lake access permits cost $200 per month. Usage was limited to scheduled 4-hour windows. Guests were prohibited without written approval. Dock maintenance required HOA contractor approval at owner expense. I studied the list of approved usage times and felt my blood pressure rise. Margaret and 3 board members had reserved the prime morning and evening slots for themselves. Everyone else got midday hours when the lake was too hot for comfortable use. This is targeted harassment, I told my attorney, David Chen, when I called his office that afternoon. They are trying to price me out of using my own property rights. Legally, you are correct, David said after reviewing my documents. Your deed clearly establishes lake access, but fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. They have deep pockets and nothing but time. What are my options? You could challenge their authority in court. It would probably cost $30,000 to $50,000 and take 2 to 3 years. You might win, but they could make your life miserable in the meantime. That weekend, I decided to test their resolve. I walked down to my dock Saturday morning with my coffee, just as I had done every day since moving in. The lake was calm and beautiful, with morning mist rising from the surface. 20 minutes later, Margaret appeared on my property with a camera and clipboard. "You are in violation of the new lake access policy," she announced, taking photos of me sitting on my own dock. "This is formal notice of a $200 fine. I am on my own property, using rights that are written into my deed." Not anymore. She handed me a violation notice and walked away. The harassment escalated quickly after that. Daily, inspections of my property resulted in frivolous violations. My garden hose was too visible from the street. My outdoor furniture was not pre-approved colors. My car was parked 6 inches too close to the property line. Each violation carried a $50 fine. Within 2 weeks, I had accumulated over $800 in penalties for things that had never been problems before. Other residents watched from their windows but said nothing. The message was clear. This could happen to them too. The final straw came when I found a notice of lien filed against my property. The HOA claimed I owed $1,500 in unpaid fines and fees. They were threatening foreclosure if I did not pay immediately. I called David Chen again, this time with desperation in my voice. "They are trying to steal my house," I told him. "They create fake violations, then use the fines to justify liens. This is extortion." Unfortunately, HOAs have broad powers to enforce their rules, even ridiculous rules. The question is whether you want to fight or find a way to make peace. There is no making peace with bullies. They want me gone because I dared to question their authority. That night I sat on my dock despite the threat of more fines. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. I had worked 20 years to afford this place. I had dreamed of this peaceful life by the water. Margaret and her cronies thought they could intimidate me into giving up. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The war for my property rights was about to begin. I spent the next 3 weeks becoming an expert on HOA law, property rights, and the background of every board member. My dining room table disappeared under stacks of legal documents, state regulations, and financial records I had requested through public information laws. What I discovered made my blood boil. Margaret had been HOA president for 8 years, during which time the community budget had doubled while actual improvements remained minimal. Contractor payments went to companies owned by her brother and son-in-law. Board members had received consulting fees for no documented services. The most damning evidence was in the financial records. Margaret had approved $30,000 in emergency repairs to her own property, paid for with HOA funds. She claimed her roof damage affected community drainage, but photos showed purely cosmetic work that increased her home value. I was not the only one suffering under her rule. Property records showed a pattern of lien filings against residents who had challenged board decisions. 3 families had been forced to sell their homes after being buried in violation fees. 2 others had paid tens of thousands in legal costs just to keep their properties. "We need to organize," I told Jim during one of our conversations by the mailbox. "She is destroying this community one family at a time." "You do not understand," Jim whispered, looking around nervously. "She has connections at the county level. Her husband used to be a judge. Her son works for the district attorney's office. People who fight her do not just lose their homes. They get audited, investigated, harassed by code enforcement." But fear was no longer an option for me. Margaret had escalated her campaign to daily violation notices. My mailbox overflowed with citations for invented infractions. Grass too tall, flowers the wrong color, imaginary noise complaints from anonymous neighbors. When I found a towing notice on my car for unauthorized parking in my own driveway, I knew she was testing how far she could push me. The notice claimed my vehicle extended 3 inches into the easement, a measurement that would require surveying equipment to verify. I began documenting everything with photos, videos, and timestamps. Every interaction with Margaret or her board members was recorded. Every violation notice was photographed and filed chronologically. I created a detailed timeline of harassment that clearly showed the pattern of retaliation. 3 other residents quietly approached me after word spread about my research. Helen, the elderly woman who had warned me after my first meeting, brought records of her own harassment from years earlier. A younger couple, Sarah and Mike, had been threatened with foreclosure over a playground set Margaret claimed violated sight line restrictions. "We tried to fight individually," Sarah explained during a secret meeting in my kitchen. "But she picks us off one at a time. Maybe together we have a chance." I contacted the state HOA regulatory agency and filed formal complaints about financial mismanagement, conflict of interest violations, and abuse of power. The complaint package was 47 pages long, with supporting documentation that clearly showed Margaret's corruption. Margaret's response was swift and vicious. I received an overnight letter from the HOA's attorney threatening immediate foreclosure if I did not pay accumulated fines totaling $4,000. The list included penalties for harassment of board members and frivolous complaints to outside agencies. "You want to play hardball," I said to my empty kitchen. "Let us play hardball." I hired David Chen to file a federal lawsuit challenging the HOA's authority and demanding an injunction against their harassment. The complaint alleged civil rights violations, fraud, and conspiracy to deprive me of property rights through systematic intimidation. When Margaret received the lawsuit papers, she appeared at my door within hours. Gone was the fake smile and professional demeanor. Her face was flushed with rage. "You have made the biggest mistake of your life," she hissed through my screen door. "I will make sure you lose everything. Your house, your savings, your reputation. I will destroy you." "Is that a threat, Margaret? Because I am recording this conversation." She noticed the phone in my hand and stepped back, but her eyes burned with hatred. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. This community was perfect before you arrived. We do not need troublemakers here. What you do not need is corruption and abuse of power. But you are about to find out what happens when you push the wrong person too far." After she left, I walked out to my dock and looked across the lake. The water was choppy from an afternoon wind, but the sun was breaking through clouds on the horizon. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Margaret thought she could intimidate me into submission. She thought her connections and legal threats would make me disappear quietly. She had no idea that I was just getting started. The real battle was about to begin. The drought started in early June and stretched through the hottest summer anyone could remember. Grass turned brown despite watering restrictions. Trees began dropping leaves in July. The lake level dropped 3 feet, exposing sections of shoreline that had been underwater for decades. Fire warnings became a daily reality. Red flag conditions were posted every afternoon. The local news showed maps of fire danger zones, and our community was marked in the highest risk category. Evacuation plans were distributed to every household. During this dangerous time, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Margaret and several board members had been dumping yard waste and construction debris in the undeveloped HOA common areas behind the community center. Piles of dead branches, grass clippings, and lumber scraps sat baking in the summer heat. I reported the illegal dumping to the fire department and county environmental office. Both agencies confirmed that the dumping violated fire safety codes and environmental regulations. They sent warning letters to the HOA, but Margaret ignored them. "It is just temporary storage," she told residents who complained at the July board meeting. "We are waiting for the best price from disposal companies." But I knew better. The dumping was Margaret's latest cost-cutting scheme. Instead of paying for proper disposal, she was creating a massive fire hazard while pocketing the savings. The hypocrisy was staggering. She fined residents for minor violations while creating a genuine safety threat. The fire started on August 15th, during the hottest, windiest day of the year. I was working in my home office when I smelled smoke. Looking out my window, I saw a brown haze rising from the direction of the common area, where the illegal dumping had been accumulating for months. Within minutes, orange flames were visible above the tree line. The wind was pushing the fire directly toward the residential section of our community. Margaret's house and 2 other board members' properties were directly in the path of destruction. I grabbed my phone and called 911, then ran outside to get a better view of the situation. The fire was spreading faster than I had ever imagined possible. The illegal dump site was acting like a massive accelerant, feeding the flames and sending burning debris flying in all directions. Fire trucks began arriving within 10 minutes, but they immediately faced a critical problem. The nearest fire hydrant was a quarter mile away, and water pressure was insufficient for the equipment they needed to fight this blaze effectively. The fire captain was shouting orders while his crew scrambled to find alternative water sources. That was when the captain noticed my property and the lake access that Margaret had tried so hard to deny me. "Sir," he called, running toward me with urgency written across his soot-covered face. "We need to use your water access immediately. It is our only chance to save the neighborhood." Behind him, 3 fire trucks waited with their hoses ready to connect to portable pumps. The irony hit me like a physical blow. For months, Margaret had claimed my lake access was a safety hazard. She had tried to regulate it, restrict it, and price me out of using it. She had threatened liens and foreclosure to force me away from the water. Now her house was burning, and that same lake access was the only thing that could save her. I looked toward Margaret's property, where flames were already licking at her fence line. Her house, where she had planned her harassment campaigns against me. Her yard, where she had hosted board meetings to plot new restrictions on my property rights. Her deck, where she had probably celebrated each violation notice she sent my way. For a split second, I considered the justice of letting natural consequences play out. She had tried to steal my access to this lake. Why should I help save her home? But then I looked at the fire captain's desperate face. I thought about the other innocent families whose homes were also threatened. I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be when this crisis was over. "Take whatever you need," I told him without hesitation. "Full access to the dock, the shoreline, whatever helps you stop this fire." The relief in his eyes was immediate. Within minutes, pumps were running, and hoses were delivering a steady stream of lake water to fight the flames. My dock became the command center for the entire firefighting operation. I watched from my yard as dozens of firefighters worked to save homes that belonged to people who had tried to destroy my life. The water they were using flowed through my property, across my land, from the lake access that Margaret had declared I had no right to use. Sometimes justice comes in the strangest forms. The fire investigation began before the smoke had cleared. County fire marshals, environmental inspectors, and insurance investigators swarmed the burn site within hours. What they found exceeded my wildest expectations for justice. The illegal dumping had not just contributed to the fire's intensity. It had created the perfect conditions for rapid spread and extreme heat that made the blaze nearly impossible to control. Accelerants in the construction debris had caused flames to reach temperatures that melted metal and shattered windows from 50 feet away. Margaret's house suffered the most damage. The fire had consumed her garage, deck, and half of her main structure before firefighters could contain it. 2 other board members lost their homes completely. The irony was not lost on anyone. The very people who had ignored fire safety regulations were the ones who paid the highest price. Within a week, insurance companies began denying claims. The illegal dumping constituted a material misrepresentation of fire risk. Policies were voided due to the HOA's knowing violation of safety codes. Margaret and the other board members faced hundreds of thousands in uninsured losses. "This is catastrophic for them," David Chin explained during our phone call. "Insurance denial means they have to rebuild entirely out of pocket if they can afford it at all." The media attention came next. Local news stations featured my role in providing water access that saved the neighborhood. I tried to stay humble during interviews, but the contrast was stark. The homeowner who had been persecuted for his lake access became the hero who saved everyone else's homes. Without this gentleman's cooperation and his lake access, we would have lost at least 12 homes instead of 3. the fire captain told reporters. His property provided the only viable water source for our suppression efforts. The financial investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Margaret's corruption. State auditors found over $90,000 in misappropriated HOA funds. Contracts had been awarded to family members at inflated prices. Board members had received payments for no-show consulting work. The special assessments she had imposed were used to subsidize improvements to her own property. Criminal charges followed quickly. Margaret was arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and environmental violations. Her mugshot appeared on the front page of the local newspaper above the headline, "HOA President Charged in Fire Scandal." Two other board members faced similar charges. The state HOA regulatory agency moved to dissolve the existing board and appoint interim management. All of Margaret's rules and fines were suspended pending a complete review of the association's governance. My $4,000 in fabricated penalties were officially voided. Several residents whose properties had been saved by the lake water access approached me personally. Helen, who had warned me about fighting the HOA, knocked on my door with tears in her eyes. "I watch from my window as they used your dock to save my home," she said. "I am so ashamed that I did not support you when you were fighting for all of us." Jim from next door brought over a bottle of wine and a handwritten thank you note. "You did what none of us had the courage to do. You stood up to them when it mattered." The couple with the playground, Sarah and Mike, organized a neighborhood petition supporting my lawsuit and condemning the previous board's harassment tactics. 18 families signed it, including several who had never spoken to me before the fire. Margaret's criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring, but her life was already in ruins. Her house was uninhabitable and uninsured. Her legal fees were mounting. Her reputation in the community was destroyed. Former friends and neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. I felt no joy in her downfall, but I felt profound satisfaction in seeing justice served. She had abused her power to hurt innocent people. She had stolen community funds for personal gain. She had created the dangerous conditions that led to the fire through her illegal dumping. The consequences she faced were the direct result of her own choices and actions. Natural justice had finally caught up with someone who thought she was above the law. As I sat on my dock that evening, watching the sunset reflect on the lake that had saved our neighborhood, I realized that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting corrupt people destroy themselves. The truth has a way of surfacing, just like bubbles rising from the bottom of a clear lake. 6 months after the fire, our community had transformed completely. The new HOA board consisted of reasonable people focused on actual community service rather than power trips and personal enrichment. They apologized publicly for the previous administration's harassment and officially recognized all property owners' deed rights. My lake access was never questioned again. The new board removed all the restrictive permits and fees that Margaret had imposed. They even installed a small plaque by the community dock thanking me for providing water access during the emergency. I finally got to enjoy the peaceful lakefront lifestyle I had originally purchased. Morning coffee by the water became a daily ritual again, without fear of violation notices or harassment. Evening sunsets painted the sky in brilliant colors that reflected perfectly on the calm lake surface. The legal victory had set an important precedent. My attorney began receiving calls from HOA victims across the state who wanted help fighting similar abuse. We started referring to it as the Lake Access case, and it was cited in several subsequent lawsuits challenging HOA overreach. Margaret never recovered from her downfall. She lost her house to foreclosure and faced 3 years in prison for embezzlement and fraud. Her family moved out of state to escape the scandal. I heard she was working retail in another city, a dramatic fall from her days as the neighborhood dictator. Several residents approached me about running for the HOA board myself, but I declined. I had no interest in wielding power over my neighbors. I just wanted to enjoy my property in peace and help others do the same. The community became stronger and more united after removing the toxic leadership that had divided us for years. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up during Margaret's reign began organizing social events and improvement projects. The fear and intimidation that had poisoned our relationships gradually disappeared. Sitting on my dock this morning, watching a blue heron hunt in the shallows, I reflected on the lessons learned from this ordeal. Bullies count on good people staying silent. Corruption thrives when no one is willing to fight back. Sometimes standing up to injustice requires risking everything you have worked for. The fire that threatened to destroy our neighborhood had ultimately saved it by exposing the truth about our leadership. My lake access, which Margaret tried so hard to steal, became the key to everyone's salvation. Justice is not always immediate, but it is inevitable for those who abuse their power. Sometimes, you just have to be patient enough to let corrupt people destroy themselves while brave enough to stand up when it matters most. The lake is peaceful again, and so am I.